We're so glad that you have joined us for this important conversation with Daughters for Justice and leaders of the NYPD, including our Police Commissioner Shea. I'd love to turn this over to my colleague, Dr. Deborah Jenkins.
Good morning, and welcome, Commissioner Shea, Chief Maddrey, and Chief Holmes. We are happy to have you here with us and everyone who is joining us this morning for this important town hall led by the Daughters for Justice. We are Reverend Kaji Doja, Minister Only Love Alston, Apostle Staci Ramos, Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer, and myself, Reverend Dr. Deborah Jenkins. And we welcome you all to this important second town hall that we are having, and we are honored to have Commissioner Shea joining us for this one. Our purpose, our co-founders are a group of 5 diverse clergy leaders who formed Daughters for Justice in recognition of the unique and nuanced voices we have as clergy. Out of an abundance of concern when attending clergy meetings led by the NYPD, we believe that by forming a group to work closely with and partner with the NYPD around areas of accountability as it relates to policing in our communities, while at the same time commending the NYPD when such commendation is warranted. We are fortunate to have been received well by the NYPD and welcomed for these reasons. To be sure, there are many areas of concern to which we could seek to amplify. However, we have chosen 4 cornerstones around which we coalesce. Those issues are anti-racism, accountability, domestic violence, and neighborhood and community engagement. And it is for those reasons that we are incredibly fortunate to have a partnership with the NYPD while keeping our eyes squarely focus on those issues and amplifying the voices within the community that are often missed. We're here today to discuss some of those things with the commissioner and the chiefs, and we are looking forward to having all of you engage along with us. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Apostle Ramos is going to open us with a prayer. And you just want to make sure that God will hear you, but we want to hear you too.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here and thank you for having us. Please let us pray. Gracious and eternal Father, we come before you on this morning giving thanks, thanking you for yet another day, a day of covering, protection, guidance, your grace and mercy. Look kindly upon us as we go forth in discussion ordained by your sovereignty. Bless the NYPD leadership today, the clergy, the community, and your Daughters for Justice. Your word says in Amos 5:24, but let justice roll down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. We stand here today in his stead. Be the balance of this meeting. Let your spirit lead and have your way. In your mighty and precious name, we have prayed. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Apostle. And for our first question, well, actually, just for a little bit of background, we're going to open up to Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer from the Interfaith Center and one of our Daughters for Justice.
Oh, good morning. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to acknowledge some other folks who are on the call. Joining us today, in addition to the Daughters for Justice, we have with us Pat Malcolm from Kush. We have Sunita Viswanath from Sadhana, Progressive Hindus, and also Dr. Uma Mysore-Ecker from the Hindu Temple of North America, Rabbi Gerson from the New York Board of Rabbis, Asya Badi from Engage, Haneti Dola from the ICNY, and on the NYPD side, we have somebody who often plays a background role, but none of this would happen without Commissioner Chauncey Parker, who is sitting next to the commissioner as well, and has really been a mover and a shaker when it comes to police reform and community involvement. As you heard from my colleague, Daughters for Justice, is a diverse clergy women committed to reimagining public safety that centers women, eradicates racism in the ranks, and builds strength and accountability. We hosted a meeting about 4 months ago with Chief of Community Affairs Jeffrey Maddrey and Chief of Patrol Juanita Holmes, along with Chauncey Parker, about racism, police accountability, domestic violence, and community outreach. Well, 4 months later, they join us again, and they brought their boss. So I guess they thought they needed protection, which is of course understandable. We will at this time then launch into a discussion about what has happened since we last met. The rocky road to reform has been just that. Crime, as we all know, is up. Lawsuits against the NYPD certainly haven't stopped, including protests after George Floyd and the handling of those protests. Homicides up, particularly family violence related homicides, and those police officers implicated in some high profile abuse are still getting salaries and pensions. That said, reform is happening. We have the putting into place of Civil Rights Law 50A, and one of the things you saw in the chat was a website where you can actually look up the disciplinary records of officers by name, including those numbers that have substantiated claims. This is not only another tool for all of us, if we're not getting our CCRB complaint number in time, it's also an disincentive for cops to misbehave. They know their grandmothers and their kids can look them up online. Everybody can, and who wants to be shown up and to have the light shine on them in that way for bad behavior. Second, the NYPD and the Civilian Complaint Review Board, the agency tasked with oversight, signed an agreement the other day down at St. Paul's Chapel, no less. And they decided to get on the same page when it comes to sentencing abusive cops. This shared disciplinary matrix, as it calls, is a step forward for police accountability because it will mean that the CCRB gets overruled less times, we hope. That's the idea anyway, I would have thought. And then third, this is the one that I think we're going to spend most time on today, the city has now come out with a two-part plan for how the NYPD will be reformed and reinvented. And that too, let's go ahead and put that one in the chat, because the second part in particular is really worth taking a look at. Recommendations, just a few in this report worth highlighting or leaped out at me, included reviewing summons practices for their disproportionate impact on poor people. That's a huge deal. Mandating misconduct reporting, including racially biased policing. And if you don't, as a police officer, make those reports, you're subject to discipline. Advocating for legislation that would take away pensions, I think, from egregious offenders and pay during suspension. That would take a piece of legislation, but it says that that's what the city is in favor of. Adding a residency requirement, a residency credit to the recruitment exam that would incentivize applications from people who lived in the 5 boroughs. That sounds like a practical step forward if that's really the case. And then finally, something I had to read twice. I'm going to read it again. I just wanted to be sure that it was written by the city and not by the Onion. The city and NYPD will engage with reconciliation and restorative justice scholars and practitioners to devise and execute an authentic, participatory, and reconciliation process at the city level and precinct level. This will occur at all 77 precincts and all patrols, including housing, transit, and headquarters. The process will include engagement of New York City residents selected by community stakeholders. Wow, really? So, that's, I think, a little bit of where we're going to go in the next hour. And I just want to commend the commissioner as a final point for the way that you have not shirked from engaging some of your critics and also those who have been hurt most deeply by the institution, including family members of high-profile New Yorkers murdered by the people who were supposed to protect them. And I'm thinking now of Gwen Carr, who you sat down with, along with Reverend Kirsten Foy and Reverend McCall the other day. And I want to close us out, just my portion, by quoting Minister Foy, who was referring to the NYPD when he said, "You all, it's not the leadership that we have had in the past. It's not the department that we have seen in the past, but it is still the department that the community sees." And I think that's the spirit in which we're conducting this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Chloe. And so now, without further ado, we would love to hear from you, Commissioner Shea. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And to all the Daughters for Justice, thank you for the invitation to be with you today and to speak. And it should be a spirited discussion. When Reverend Chloe just talked about many of those topics that came up in the reform plan, I'm writing notes here, and there is a lot that we could talk about. A lot has transpired in the last year, for sure. I think that when you look at where we are now as a police department, also as a city and as a country, you know, this time of reckoning, I would call it, has taken us on a path that has not been a straight line, and I don't think it will continue to be a straight line. But I think important is the journey, and that at all ways on this journey that we do it more often than not, hopefully together, I think is a win. I'm gonna just, you recognize, but Chauncey, who is behind the scenes, you're right, but the mover and the shaker is a new way to relate to Chauncey, but that's exactly what he is. I also have a couple other people here, Chief Dietrich and Inspector Soto joining me, and as well as Jeff Maddrey and Juanita Holmes. You know, when you think of this reform plan and when you think of everything that has transpired of late, we recognize, and I'll be brief here, we recognize that we have a lot of work to do. At the same time, you know, we're very proud of the work that the men and women in this police department do for the people of New York City to keep them safe. But I often find myself reverting to, you know, we started today with prayers, reverting to prayers and reverting to balance, that we have to be balanced in everything that we do. And we live right now in such a polarizing time. I find myself leaning, and I'm going to have some asks for you as we move through this discussion today, but leaning on the clergy more and more to find that balance, and to find and to point out to people that, you know, reverting to your corner, if you will, is doing none of us any good. And that was what was behind some of my recent speeches. That's what's behind some of my recent policy changes here in the NYPD, and trying to find common ground with, ultimately, at the end of the day, the people that we put our right hand up and swear to protect and serve. There's been a lot of good done, but there's a lot that we still have to do. And there's a lot of, I would challenge everyone on the call to Minister One Love, when you talked about God is always hearing. I think that people have to hear us, and we got to do a better job as an NYPD and as an agency of telling our story and giving people the opportunity to hear when we admit we're wrong, some of the good work that we're doing, but more important than all of that, or just as important, is that we cannot do this alone. And we're going to need your help and people like you throughout New York City to take us where we want to go. You're going to hear from Juanita and Jeff in a moment, I'm sure, but there's a lot of important discussions today, everything from racism, historic racism, some of our policies. When you talk about CCRBs, that was just mentioned, and accountability when officers do wrong. But there's also discussions on, you know, there was an article in the paper recently about how, I'll paraphrase, more often than not, I don't agree with CCRB. That's just not true. And it's relationships like this that I think are going to help us get through periods like that and open the door to, rather than reading something in the paper, picking up the phone and calling and saying, hey, what about this? Is this true or not? And we could tell you our position, because in any discussion like this, there are multiple sides and multiple discussions. And I just want to, again, thank you for inviting us on today and taking this journey with us.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Shea, and we do look forward to engaging and digging in deep on some of the questions that are coming up. And so those are going to start now. And of course, we'll look to you to engage your colleagues who are on screen. Thank you again, Chiefs Holmes and Maddrey, for joining us as well on screen. And okay, so the next question is coming from our sister minister, Only Love Alston. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us, Commissioner. My name is Minister Only Love Commissioner. So Chief Maddrey and Chief Holmes know that. So what else could I do but Minister Only Love Alston? And I'm with Prophetic Whirlwind Ministries, representing the Hebrew community, and also working with Reverend Chloe Breyer as the Racial Justice Organizing Fellow at the Interfaith Center. And so I just wanted to ask a question about something that is very disturbing for us as women, as mothers, as potential mothers, and that has to do with our children and their encounters with the police. So, and I want to acknowledge Minister Tara Brown Arnell, who's the director of Urban Youth Alliance Bronx Connect, which works with youth, with court-involved youth. And she's done that for many years. And I was with Bronx Connect, and we're working on the Right to Remain Silent campaign, which is legislation that will be passed in Albany to end youth interrogations by police without counsel present. This happened with the Central Park Five. This happened with many of the youth I worked with at Bronx Connect, and also with staff when they were younger. And so we do have a concern about young people who can't vote, who can't go to the Army, being asked about their Miranda rights and being pressured to waive their Miranda rights when they may not know what that term means. About study has shown 90% of young people waive their Miranda rights in interrogations. And science shows that the brain is not fully developed until the age of 25. And so we were very concerned when a news report came out on March 4th on PIX channel 11 that showed a video obtained by the Legal Aid Society of New York. And it showed a young person in Brooklyn being interrogated with no counsel present. His mom was present, but a mother is important, but not a lawyer. And there were deceptive tactics allegedly used to get him and then his mother to speak and to basically waive their Miranda rights. And the Right to Remain Silent campaign is 68 organizations, including Daughters4Justice, throughout New York State. And there are hundreds of stories about this. California passed this legislation, certain parts of Washington State, and even Maryland is looking at it. So we wanted to ask you, can you speak to what happened in Brooklyn, and what are you and your staff prepared to do to protect the human rights of our children during interrogations? Because what happened in Brooklyn is not isolated, and we appreciate partnering with you and definitely Chief Maddrey and Chief Holmes. We're here to be partners, but many of us on this call are also mothers.
Yep.
And I'm not a mother, but for 2 years I worked with court-involved youth day in and day out and heard their stories and saw their tears sometimes. So what can we do to protect our young people when they're being interrogated?
So thank you, Minister Only Love, for the question. I'm going to start out broad and just make a broad statement that I don't like to speak to specific incidents that potentially could have implications in cases that are ongoing. So I'll talk to exactly what you mentioned, but in a broader hypothetical sense of, I am a parent too. So I am a parent of 3 beautiful children, 2 grandchildren now. And when you speak of this topic, believe me that I hear the concerns specifically about questioning juveniles. And I think there's probably few things that are more sacrosanct than the children in our lives and the right to protect them. I also think about, when you mention these topics, the balance of public safety that enters my mind as well, in terms of, thankfully, it's not driving most of the crime in New York City or most of the violence. But, you know, as I look at Juanita and Jeff, they've each been on the front lines for many years, and they'll tell you as well that there is a bit of an issue with some of the violence in the city regarding juveniles and gangs. So we try to balance that as well. I think that any discussion here, if there's mistakes made, I could tell you that there was a legal aid sent me a letter recently on a separate case. I believe it was in Manhattan. I could be wrong. I think it was Manhattan, that dealt with our policy on juvenile interrogations and video recording, and asking me to take a look at a situation that we may have made a mistake. I can tell you that I sat down with our attorneys within the last 2 weeks and are reviewing all of our policies, and I've asked them to come back to me with some common sense recommendations. You know, what is our current policy? Is it strong enough? Does it comply with the law? Even if it complies with the law, should we make changes further than what the law requires to our policy? So we are in the midst of doing that now regarding juvenile interrogations. I also have Chauncey here. I'm interested what he would say, because as a former prosecutor, both at the Manhattan DA's office and at the federal level, I think that there is balance needs to be struck here. I don't know if I would agree with what you said wholesale, Minister. I worry about the implications it may have on, in a perfect world, affording juveniles even more rights legislatively is a noble cause. I do worry, though, from a practitioner, what that would do to us in terms of keeping people in New York City safe. And that's that balance that I'm always trying to strike. I could tell you that, you know, we absolutely will follow whatever the law is, the legislation is. Wholesale saying, if we're talking about the same thing, that less than 18-year-olds cannot be interrogated. I'd have to see exactly what you're recommending. Without an attorney, or is it what about in the presence of the parents?
The parents don't count because parents don't have legal training. So, I mean, the parents are important. The parents are important, but for legal, the parent may not understand Miranda rights. You know, I work with many African immigrants that are not from this country. And one thing I want to say, so Bronx Connect has a cure violence program. So we are the organization that is anchoring Right to Remain Silent, though I'm no longer with them, they're in the streets dealing with the public safety. Apostle Staci Ramos is in the streets doing cure violence work. I've gone out with her on Sabbath. So we are very aware of public safety. Also, I work on domestic violence. And so we know that we have to protect survivors and victims. So it doesn't have to be an either or. Having a counsel present with the youth, if they committed a crime, can still be charged, can still go through an interrogation, but having that counsel present will make sure that someone whose brain is not even developed, and we can connect you to a neuroscientist out of John Jay, a doctor. What will happen with that counsel present is someone who cannot go to war, cannot vote, whose brain is not developed, won't be pressured into a false confession like we've seen with the Central Park Five. So it doesn't have to be safety or protecting our youth. When we protect our youth, we actually make our community safer, because in interviewing a staff member, my former coworker who experienced this interrogation at 13, and you brought up the parents, Kwan Linkos, who now does cure violence work at Bronx Connect. He was interviewed for the city. He was interrogated without counsel by 5 officers. He repeatedly requested someone call one of his parents, and it was laughed off. So even if we say having the parent there is safer, we have stories where parents were not allowed to come. So we need something that will protect our children across the board.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of great points there. I agree with you, and I value incredibly the role of all the community in what we are all trying to do together. And I don't think it's like police keeping people safe. It's got to be all of us working together. And the role of whether it's Cure Violence or yourselves and many others, I hope we get to a point where we don't have to choose, right, between the rights of the juveniles and public safety. We gotta do it all. We gotta protect the rights and keep the public safe. I'm gonna turn it to Chauncey in a second, but what I think that, you know, we've moved to a system here in the last couple of years where we videotape all of our interrogations, and that's over and above what the law requires. So if there was a category or an instance of police doing something inappropriate or misleading people or not following Miranda protections, that there is a system in place where that evidence would be suppressed. I just want to get that out. That may not be all that you're looking for, but that is a point in this discussion. And the one thing I would maybe push back on is when you start talking about all of us, about the difference between like parents there and counsel. I do think we need to be eyes wide open on this, that a counsel's job is to protect the rights of the accused. And that's a really important job. But the counsel, in my 30 years of experience, there is not going to be statements made. This is just eyes wide open in the presence of counsel that is going to do anything to hurt that defendant. And that's a good thing from the counsel's perspective, but from the law enforcement perspective that's trying to build a prosecutable case and bring people that have committed crimes to justice and have them not necessarily jail or prison, but to be held accountable for those. If we think that the counsel is going to step in that, and we're going to have a situation where detectives are going to collect the evidence, I don't think that's accurate at all. But
and one thing I want to say, because you mentioned parents, but my colleague Kwan asked for his parents multiple times and they weren't allowed. And again, parents don't have legal training. I represent Mothers of the Nations, an African women clergy group. Many immigrants would be so afraid to even sit in an interrogation, especially if they're undocumented. And Pastor Kaji leads in the New Sanctuary movement. So we, above all, Commissioner, children have human rights, and we have to find a way to protect them. What happened with the Central Park Five, what happened with George Wiley 70 years ago, he was a 14-year-old African-American boy in the South that was interrogated without counsel, without parents, and he was executed at 14. He was so short, they had to sit him on books to execute him. And so there's been a long history of dangerous things happening when children are interrogated without anyone representing them. And so I would love to hear from you and Chief Parker, but I just have to lift up, we have to find a way to protect children's human rights.
And Minister, your points about the parents and being afraid or maybe not understanding and coming from different cultures, I agree with you 100%. There is I'm not debating that whatsoever. When you talk about some of the stories from the past, whether it's recent past or distant past, I'm going to turn it, Chauncey, to you in a second. But when you talk about like 13 and 14-year-olds, you know, the policy of the NYPD and the laws of New York are maybe not all that you would like it to be, but, you know, 13-year-olds, we're not going to be interrogating without a parent. And when you talk about like young children like that, we break it down different steps. I mean, the laws with raise the age was changed a couple of years ago, where now 16 and 17-year-olds became juveniles in New York. There's different levels built in there, but I think that, you know, there's a level of protections that are currently, there's no doubt this discussion is a good thing in my eyes, where we discuss, you know, where are we, where do we want to go, are there things that we could do further? I just merely raised that I think people should understand that should we go to a place, and this is why I think this is so important, because sometimes laws are passed, and then on the law enforcement side, sometimes we agree with them, sometimes we disagree with them, and sometimes we said, you know what, we like the spirit of that, but maybe if it had said something different. And there's a lot of different opinions here, there's no doubt. But I think this discussion before the law is passed is exactly what we're looking for, just so we can voice some of the concerns that we have, because I fear that, you know, if we had exactly as it was described today, I don't think there's any doubt there would be less convictions. Now the question becomes, from society's point of view, all of us, is that what an acceptable level of risk that we're willing to protect the kids? And I think that's all good. Chauncey?
And Commissioner, really quick, just for clarity, my K1, this happened to him at 13. And I understand your fear for public safety. As a woman, I fear for public safety. I also fear bringing a Black child in this world and something happening to them with an encounter with the police. So I'm looking forward to hearing from your colleague, and thank you so much.
Yeah, and that is why, you know, when we look at the policies we put into place over the last couple of years, dropping arrests by over 200,000, dropping stops, dropping summonses. I know Juanita's probably chomping at the bit to talk to, and putting all the resources into kids, because I would like to get to the place where we're not even sitting in an interrogation room with kids. Instead, we're sitting on a basketball court or behind a computer monitor or at a athletic field playing sports or doing other activities with them. And we're doing all that too. But Chauncey before, and then Juanita.
Hi, Minister Only Love, it's Chauncey. How are you? Can you hear me?
Hi, I'm well, but it's hard to hear you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
If other sisters can hear, let us.
Okay. I'm just jumping into the commissioner's
Much
chair.
better.
Hi, how are you?
Just
So I would
promotion.
I think what you're saying, Minister Only Love, is so critically important. I would just make a couple of observations. One is, as Reverend Breyer said, and the police commissioner said in the beginning of their comments, is that we're in a moment in time where we're all looking in good faith at how we protect the city, how we serve the city, and we got to be open to all sorts of all different ideas. And this question particularly, and I say this as a prosecutor, both working in the DA's office and the U.S. Attorney's office, it can be very complicated, very sensitive. The cases that come before can be under the most serious cases. It could be somebody who's killed. But it's a question of when somebody, if the parent is there, can somebody knowingly, voluntarily, intelligently, can they? And this is an important question, and it could be that the answer is no, it can never happen. But that's the question as to whether or not that can happen, and that's something we have to approach this in good faith. But the current, as you know, the current law is that there are circumstances where a parent can make that decision and decide that it's in the best interest of the child to go forward. But we all have to approach this with a listening heart, so to speak, to see if that's the way forward. But it is, as the police commissioner said, it's a balance. But the most important thing is these are conversations where everybody's coming to the table together to try to figure this out. I know what you're sponsoring and your work in Albany, which is very important. We're all engaging in that conversation, and we'll approach it in good faith.
And thank you so much. So just for clarity, because the comment was made, well, if council is present, there'll be a lot of like people kids who should be, we're talking about kids who should be convicted, who won't be. But we have a team of researchers, lawyers. We have a brain scientist on our team, legal advocates from across the state. We're collaborating with the other states working on this. The statistics show 90% of young people waive their Miranda rights. So when we think about what can happen, it's a greater chance of getting a false confession from a child whose brain is not fully developed. There's a higher chance of a false confession than a child getting off who should not have gotten off. So we really need to think about what we are doing. We have one of the most famous cases of an unjust interrogation situation with 5 children in the nation, maybe the world. And so we really, really have to think about not only how are we protecting property, how are we protecting the community, which is important to me as a domestic violence advocate, but how are we protecting our children? Because many of them don't even know what Miranda means. And if you can't go to war, if you can't drink a beer, if you can't vote, how can you be a part of an interrogation that could maybe alter the course of your whole entire life without legal representation? So thank you so much. And I don't know if we're doing it over to
Juanita or Jeff, did you want to add anything? I'm sorry.
Hi. Good morning, Commissioner.
Hi.
And good morning, everyone, and happy Women's History Month to everyone. So, when I think about juveniles, I know how serious the department, first of all, me as a mother, a woman, but also the department, even if you look at our policy, when the juvenile is a female, we assign a female officer to the person. In addition to that, we have redesigned, I don't know if all, but many of our juvenile rooms where children are kept. So it's suitable for a child. And I know Chauncey had a lot of information on that, and just information that we have on the viable signs, which is like a TV screen scrolling, just offering them assistance or recommending certain, whether it's community-based organizations or whether it's the cadet explorers, things of that nature, to young people. Very, very, some of the things you mentioned about the understanding of Miranda, that's actually in our guide as well. Children are, first of all, not to be questioned. I understand parents may not comprehend as well what Miranda means, but also with children, we make every attempt to reach a parent or have someone present. And if not, that child still cannot be questioned if they don't comprehend very well, depending on their intelligence level, is taken into consideration, as well as their ability to understand what Miranda is. And that's actually written into our guide to be abided with. So there are a lot of things that we've definitely been doing with children, including, like the commissioner mentioned, creating the YCO officers, all right? Because, well, like I said, I always say this when I came back, one of the things that intrigued me that the commissioner was doing new was bolstering the neighborhood coordinating officers with the YCO, because he felt that's a population we were missing. And not just a population that comes to our attention, whether it's an explorer, a cadet, or whether it's a juvenile, but all children. And we've since populated that position and deployed officers to most of the precincts, and it's not the standard number. The 7-3 may have 6 YCOs, and the 8-1 maybe have 3 YCOs, depending on the population of children there. So I understand your concerns. Trust me, like the commissioner said, when it comes to children, we are very, very sensitive to their needs and making sure that policy and procedure is abided with. So I just wanted to speak about some of the positive things that have been changes that have been made or put in place surrounding juveniles.
Thank you so much, Chief Holmes, for always being present. And I turn it over to Pastor Cog.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you all for your responses. You know, just something that I think about as I listen to this incredibly important example of the kinds of things that we can say to each other is that as we engage these issues, I just wonder, why would children not have the same right that adults have? I mean, it's that simple. You know, my child, if they wind up in front of police, my niece, if she's in another police department, I'm sure your nieces and nephews across the country, you would say, if you are pulled into an interrogation room, you wait for your lawyer. I'm sure you would say that. So anyway, thank you very much for that. And I would love to introduce our next questioner, who is Dr. Deborah Jenkins. Thank you.
Well, Commissioner, you got your spirited conversation started with that question, and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
That is, and I think that we speak in one voice, and Minister Only Love, you did a great job. Thank you. So my area of most concern, and that I'm speaking about and asking you about, is the neighborhood engagement and community engagement. I have read part 1, and Reverend Breyer did give us all, and it's in the chat for those of you who have not been able to look at part 2 of the police reform package. It's in these areas on paper, it looks so wonderful. It looks so wonderful, and we are hopeful that these elements will come to fruition, but we do know that much work is ahead of us. And Chief Holmes, you just briefly mentioned the YCOs, which I was so happy, Commissioner, when you instituted that last year, so that there could be a spotlight put on the needs of our young people. But also Chief Maddrey and Daughters4Justice, we've all been having these back and forth conversations, and Chief Holmes, about beefing up or fortifying the NCO program, because as a clergy liaison in the 45th precinct, great NCO officers, but often it seems to me that the NCO officers are doing the Build the Bridge program, but not a whole lot else. And I believe that we are at a critical time in policing and in this city, that their roles need to be so much clearer. There needs to be clear distinctions perhaps between them and your officers, Chief Maddrey, but there needs to be a community presence that are not identified only by the blue shirts of the community affairs officers, and then the NCOs in full police uniforms. We need them in the communities. And so my question is 3 parts, actually. We wanted to follow up on some discussions we had with you, Chief Maddrey, back in November around the NCO officers program. And I don't know if that's who it should be, Commissioner. You assigned that question's response, I suppose, but certainly showing respect to you, Chief, because we've spoken extensively about the community affairs officers, Chief Holmes, about the NCOs. We're concerned about more presence on the ground from not just the youth coordinating officers, but the NCOs. And parenthetically, with the youth coordinating officers, since the reform includes moving the school safety officers back under the Department of Education, their roles will become that much more critical to our schools and to our communities, the YCOs, that is. The second part is George Floyd protest. Another article that I'd like to bring up is the ProPublica article that was released a couple of weeks ago. And Reverend Breyer mentioned the work that you are all doing. And you also mentioned that there's more agreement between you or the NYPD and the CCRB than what is generally known. My concern, this may be just my concern, but I doubt it as a community representative, that there be a little bit more autonomy in the CCRB, especially in that ProPublica, because that ProPublica article mentioned that more than 700 complaints were filed during the protest last summer. And the CCRB steered some members of the community away from filing complaints. That is a huge concern for me and many of the community residents, because we would like to know that they really are able to function as organically and independently as possible from the NYPD. And so that's a grave concern. Finally, Chief Maddrey, we've been working with you and your great team around introducing some implicit bias training. You have agreed, and we're just following up to see if these things, if we can work continuously with you to implement the training module that we would like to present to you all. Commissioner, it is your go.
That's a lot. So I'll talk about CCRB quick. There was a large number of complaints made against members of the NYPD during the George Floyd protests. I think we all know that. When you look at civilian complaints historically, from 10 years ago, we're at a lower level. That's a positive. We actually had less last year than the year before. But the protests, if we had, it is what it is there. I wish we could all say, well, if the protests didn't happen, they happened, and everything that came out of it came out of it. Hopefully one day we'll look back and say that was the impetus for so much positive change. But there were times when the NYPD certainly did not shine, and we've all seen those videos, and I've tried to hold the officers accountable there. The one thing, I have never really heard that there were incidents that people were trying to make complaints about NYPD and they were being pushed away by the Civilian Complaint Review Board. That I have not heard. The Civilian Complaint Review Board is completely separate from us. I think they do a good job of holding the NYPD accountable. And I know they do more outreach now, even when complaints aren't being made, to get people to file complaints. In fact, some police officers don't like that, but I have not heard that. I know Fred Davey is a really professional, CEO, if you will, of the Civilian Complaint Review Board. On the George Floyd protests in general, this spins through everything we're talking about. The Department of Investigation issued a report. The city's attorney issued a report. We went on record, I did personally pretty early on, and said the recommendations that were made by those two reports, we're going to fully incorporate them into NYPD policies and training moving forward. Shame on us if we don't say there's not things that we could do better or mistakes that we made and areas to improve. That's ongoing. In fact, we published, I believe it's already online, I hope I'm right, a tracker that's on the NYPD website where we list all of the things that they said that we should do, and we give a status report of what's done already and what's still in progress. So we think we did a lot of things right. We know that we made mistakes, and we're trying to be as transparent as possible about it. I'm going to squeeze in and ask for everyone right now on this call that jury selection is going on right now for the Minneapolis trial, the murder of George Floyd. The trial, we believe, is going to start within a couple weeks. I don't know if this is right, but I think the trial is expected to last 4 to 6 weeks. We're going to ask all New Yorkers, and I'm going to continue to push Jeff Maddrey to ask and beg, really, our clergy leaders and people across this city to just be as vocal as possible in this really critical time for New York City. That we want people to come out. We want people to come out and protest and voice your concern, but please let's do it together as one city without property damage or anything else, because we don't want to go through another period like we did in May and June. And I think that coming from leaders, whether it's in government or spiritual leaders, that'll mean a lot. And I myself plan to do the same thing. So I ask of that of you. Regarding NCOs, I'm going to stop after this one, and then Jeff and Juanita, you can talk about implicit bias and school safety officers. I like to have this conversation instead of talking about neighborhood coordination officers, which I think are great, or youth coordination officers, which I think are great, or community affairs officers, which I also think do a great job, and police officers in general that are out there keeping the public safe. We've had debates internally about, do we get rid of those blue shirts? every police officer should feel that they are a neighborhood coordination officer, that they're there to serve the community. So if we ever get to the place where I want to be, it's not people in the community saying, I want the community affairs officer. You're not going to care. You just want a police officer because you're treated the same with dignity, respect, and there's a sense of service that the police officers bring to the table. So I don't know how quick we get there, but that's what I am trying to instill upon the officers. What a special place it is to be able to serve the people in New York City. And it's not community affairs job to be, the nice police. Everyone's job is to be the nice police and to have relationships. So Jeff, you can pick it up from there, but I did not address implicit bias and I didn't address the school safety officers. Maybe Juanita can jump in on that one. Jeff?
Yes, good morning. Good morning, Commissioner Shea, Chief Holmes, Chauncey. Good morning, Commissioner Parker. And to D4J, good morning. I got like 4 minutes left to say good morning because we'll be at noon. To Dr. Jenkins, to Pastor Maddrey, Dr. Chloe, Minister Only Love, and Apostle Ramos. Good morning to you and everybody on the call. Dr. Jenkins, your question, you had a lot of questions in your question, and I'll try and tackle some of the other portions of your questions, and then I'll pass it over to Chief Holmes. But really just echoing what the police commissioner said, neighborhood policing is a philosophy. It's a philosophy for all police officers where we go out into the communities and we're listening, we're being compassionate and showing patience and empathy, connecting with our communities. I mean, when you really get down to it, neighborhood policing is really about going out there and showing your heart and soul as a person and as a human, and just understanding people, being able to relate with some of their things. And even when you can't relate to their situations or their crises, you just recognize and realize that a person is going through something and you just have to show a lot of patience and extend yourself. And that's what neighborhood policing is all about. And it goes so much further than just a community affairs officer, a neighborhood coordination officer, or a youth coordination officer. It has to be for every police officer. Because what does it mean if today you're having coffee with a community affairs cop and then tomorrow you have a negative interaction with a patrol cop? It's all in the toilet, all right? It's really about every member of the department going out there, working with our communities and just showing that empathy, patience, and connecting with people. So, and that's what the commissioner, that's his vision. When he sat me down and discussed me taking community affairs over, he really laid down some things that he wanted to see from me, connecting with youth, connecting with communities. And one of his big things he always says to me is, hey, Jeff, when I see our cops out there, I want to see them talking. I want to see all our cops talking to the people in the community, not just community affairs or NCO. That cop in the police car, the cop who's standing on a post, whoever it is, they're supposed to be engaging and dealing with our communities in an appropriate way, in a way that we're connecting and showing that this is a department that cares. So that's what neighborhood policing philosophy is all about, and that's what we have to work to. Since I've been here, D4J has been one of my closest partners, and Apostle Ramos, she's one of my new big sisters, and we fight like brother and sister sometimes. Not bad. Apostle Ramos is tough, and she straightens me out. But again, that's what family do. Family fight, and it's all about love at the end of the day. And I'm learning so much of that from the D4J and the way they operate, and the way they show leadership and patience, and the way that they want to work and connect with the police department, but still want to hold us accountable. That's what it's all about. We work together, we show love, but then again, we also demand accountability because we all want the best for one another. So that's what it's all about. In terms of the training, and the D4J was extremely helpful and thoughtful, and that they put together a training module that we're going to use, that I'm going to use, because I'm rewriting the training module for community affairs, because the community affairs training, when new officers come to community affairs in this bureau, our training is a little lackluster. So we're in the process of rebuilding the whole training model for the new officers that come in. All the officers that are in here are going to go through the training, and the training module that you wrote, that I hope you're going to come down and teach. We'll be definitely a part of it, and a whole bunch of other different training modules that are coming right out of the community. I have another thing called the Burning House Project that's from another member of the community. He sat down here and took me through it, and I'm using his model. So your model, his model, and I have like 3 other models that are coming based out of the community to help with the training. I already spoke to Chief Corey, on relatively new chief of training, about your training and other modules. I want his people to come and be a part of it, and then that way they'll hopefully adopt what's been delivered to the community. So our training will be coming, I hope some of our training will be coming directly from the community. All right, it'll be coming from the community's thoughts, their aspects, and again, it'll help us increase our accountability, to help increase our understanding of the community and what our community wants to see from us. In terms of school safety, you know, school safety is going through a transition, and Chief Holmes was the former commanding officer of school safety, so she'll probably have a little bit more intimate knowledge. So I'll just give a little overview, and I'll ask Juanita to kind of just tighten up whatever I miss. But school safety is going through a transition right now. We were just on the budget. I was on the budget, my first budget talks with city council, with the police last week, and that was a small piece of it. School safety is slated to leave the NYPD in June of 2022, and you know, it's really going to be under the Department of Education's model. It's going to be their vision. They're taking over. I think they actually rolled out some of their first training for the school safety agents this week, a DOE-based training. So we're still not fully aware of their vision and what they want to do. I mean, you talk about it's very intricate, from the uniforms to the titles to what's written on the cars. It's a very, very intricate and detailed process. But the process is happening right now, and by June of 2022, they will not be under our control. But what I must say is, and I heard the police commissioner say this often, and I have to say this right now too, when you look at the school safety, our school safety division, 70% minority women who really, really go above and beyond in our communities, all right? These are mothers, a lot of them, most of them are mothers, all right?
And mothers.
My experience is they nurture families. You know what, something came up about scanning last week, and I looked. I was in the first scanning school in 1988 in Andrew Jackson High School out in Queens. And I can name quite a few of those school safety officers who were there at the time, because they were very nurturing and very caring. And you know what? A lot of them, when the NYPD, when the school safety transitioned over to NYPD, a lot of them were still there, and their attitudes didn't change, and how they treated the young people didn't change. These were mother and father figures, brother and sister figures, who really cared for the young people that were in those schools. And my experience is it's still the same. These are people who, many of them live right in the communities that they serve. The schools are right within walking distance of their homes, and they treat those kids with respect. So there was a lot of negative things said about the school safety agents, and I think it was absolutely wrong, because a lot of them work hard and did a lot for their schools and their communities. But I'll pass over to Chief Holmes, and she'll finish off the Dr. Jenkins' questions.
So I echo what Chief Maddrey is saying, especially about the school safety agents. And I think one thing people have to remember, these are Black and brown women mostly. And with that being said, you know, they're concerned about layoffs, because NYPD probably doubled the size once they came over to NYPD in comparison to what was employed by DOE. So we have to think about that as well when we think about that transition. But I think you summed it up. You spoke about the scanning schools. That was a question. And, you know, we have probably over 1,400 buildings in school safety, 1,800 or something schools, and there's only 80 something scanning sites. So think about that number, really insignificant, and only 70 something are what we call permanent scanning sites. The others are based on if something happens or part-time. But I think I just want to touch back on the NCO because you mentioned the NCO engagement and what's changing, how it looks good on paper. One thing I can assure you that it looks good on paper, but there is accountability, there is change. You can probably walk into any of your precincts and ask them to explain to you as far as the commanding officer is concerned or the XO, what does their community solution program look like and what area they're focused in. I know someone on the call today was on the call that I did with the Greater Harlem Coalition in the confines of the 2A precinct, where we were bringing people to the table, community-based organizations, DHS, sanitation, directors of security for the methadone clinics that were involved, and having a strong conversation about what role those individuals would play and them coming together and devising a plan to address those issues that the community was very, very concerned with. That's being done citywide. How do we assure accountability? Because we have what's called neighborhood stat. And neighborhood stat gets a little bit deeper than CompStat. CompStat's mostly crime-driven and investigations, but we get to the nitty-gritty about what the community affairs officer is doing, what the neighborhood coordinating officer is doing. I don't like to refer to them as NCOs because that always describes 2 officers. There's a sector there with additional probably 6 to 8 other officers. It should be a neighborhood policing team concept. And we're digging down to see what it is that they're doing. I mentioned at a meeting with the chief of department, naturally their career path is to lead them into an investigative component, which is great. We want to reward them for their hard work, but first and foremost, facilitating, coordinating relationships, as well as, addressing community issues and crime. A lot of times we're seeing how NCOs are pulled into that investigative, environment where they're going out doing what we call canvasses, looking for if a car is stolen, getting information, looking to see if there's cameras. Those are things we want the detectives to stick with, and that's what we're speaking with, so the NCOs can have that extra time to make sure that they're involved with the community, which is what they were designed to do. So I can assure you this department is always ever evolving. We've done so from 2015. The commissioner I know often speaks to that when we implemented the NCO philosophy, and we will continue to grow. And we know that we have to get better at what we do. So naturally, we put things in place. We create change by bringing the community into it. They're a big part of public safety and improving quality of life. We can't do it without you. Huge component of precision policing. And I know we're short for time, so I want to close by saying I echo the commissioner, because that philosophy should be the fabric of the NYPD. All officers, right? Not just your title. Your title is descriptive because naturally patrol is riding around answering our responding to our 311s and 911 calls. Community affairs is working with the commanding officer, aligning relationships with the clergy, with the elected officials. And NCOs are out there doing build-a-block meeting and facilitating coordinated relationships. But that's the only difference, should be their job description. The fabric of this department is customer service.
Thank you, Chief Holmes. And we also just want to acknowledge that you, for Women's History Month, are being celebrated this month, and we celebrate you as well for this historic role that you have taken on. And we appreciate Commissioner Shea for elevating you to this role as Chief of Patrol. We're really proud of you and grateful for all your work. Okay, so we do have about 5 minutes left before we go into prayers and closing and next steps. And we want to make sure that we take that time. But I did want to acknowledge that we do have several questions and wanted to ask you, Commissioner Shea, what the best way to come to these questions. One is on the relationship with the Muslim community and surveillance there, and another is about the relationship with the PBA, Police Benevolent Association, and some of the very troubling messaging that comes out of there, and that relationship with the NYPD. We don't want to drop that, so we just wanted to acknowledge that it's there and maybe give you a chance to respond.
So I'll address the first one. I mean, the relationship with the Muslim community, and I think that that's unique, but then I think that you could copy it in many ways and change the neighborhood and the, you know, the group that you're talking about. We have to make sure that we're inclusive with all parts of New York City, whether it's African-American, whether it's Asian, whether it's LGBTQI, you know, and Muslim, you can add into that. We certainly have a history that the lawsuits that were filed in the past, the settlements, you know, I can tell you that one of the things we're doing specifically with the Muslim component is, number one, you know, Jeff Maddrey and meeting, and whether it's through clergy or community leaders, but then also, you know, leaning on our own membership. We have a very healthy NYPD fraternal organization made up of very proud Muslim members, and sitting down with them and saying, here's where we are as a department and as a city, what can we do together? And I think that that has been very helpful in terms of bridging that gap and moving forward together. In terms of the unions, I get asked this, and it's generally about either the PBA or the SBA, the sergeants. You know, I'm certainly not, you know, happy with many of the comments. I've said that publicly a number of times, particularly about some of the comments that have come out of the SBA and tweets and things. I think the world would be a better place without Twitter sometimes. But there's also a component of it where the union is afforded rights at times. My job is to make sure that lines aren't crossed. And if they are crossed, that people are held accountable. I could tell you that, you know, it's widely reported that there are some investigations going on internally, and those must play out. But I don't think, and I'm not, I don't garner favors with some of the unions when I say this, but I don't think it's helpful. I don't think comments and tweets, I think they have a job to do. I think people need to recognize that too in defending their membership. But I don't think that public comments that divide people and divide the city or drive a wedge through police officers and certain parts of the community, I wish it didn't happen, and I certainly don't think it's helpful. And I think the more we move past that, the better it is for everyone. I think that, well, that's what I have to say on that.
Appreciate that, and appreciate you, Commissioner. What I'd love to do is to let everybody know that we are receiving all these questions, and what we're going to do is wrap them up, and we are in constant contact with the department, and we're going to promise to ask them and to stay in touch. I'm going to turn this over and want to acknowledge as well our volunteer with us, Danielle Williams. And I always get your last name wrong, so please forgive me, who is going to help us and is helping us with the chat. So please do keep putting your questions in the Q&A, and we will address them with the department. But I want to turn things over to Apostle Staci Ramos.
Hello, everyone. Again, thank you again for this platform. We are short on time, so I'm just going to really go into it. And then if it's okay with Reverend Dr. Chloe, I'm going to turn it over to my dear Reverend Dr. Kaji. I'm going to turn it over to my dear sister, Chloe, Reverend Chloe. I just really wanted to mention one thing, but it's more of a question and a statement. And I want to just jump right into it. Town halls such as these can bring light to collective bargaining by law enforcement, right? So this is in reference to accountability and discipline, and this can lead and has led to increased violence and incidences of misconduct, right? So I want to really know if this goes unchecked, it's almost like a get out of jail free card. So what is really being done to really hold police officers accountable in terms of their actions and this misconduct? And what happens, honestly, that I don't think anybody's really tapping into is it not only affects the entire community, as we can see, COVID uptick, pandemic, the violence is soaring, but it also affects the police department, Chief. It affects the police department. And how does it do that? It affects the police department in a way where the culture is set, Commissioner Shea, that the community already there's distrust. And it also gives you this free card that says, if I can go without accountability and these incidences, that my other colleagues will also do this. This will be an ongoing thing because it is already approved in certain areas. So it affects us desperately and deeply, and we're addressing it, but it also affects the police department overall because it looks like there is no accountability being set. No one needs to be responsible for what's being taken, and the trust factor in the community is at an all-time low. So I know there are some things in place. However, what can we do now? And then the very last thing I want to say is Stephanie McGraw of WARM, We All Really Matter. She and I are working on lobbying a law. There is no law in place that when a DV victim has this happen to them, that they go to the hospital or wherever they report this, that it is not mandatory for the police department to be notified. They do not have to be notified at all. So the victims suffer. The people that are at the hospitals or wherever they go feel unhelped, or they're not getting anywhere, and then the police are not even notified. So we're working on getting that done, but I want to know, why is it not mandatory in domestic violence of women, children, families, that the police department does not have to be notified immediately once the case is given, once the person reports it, once it happens? Thank you.
Yeah, you want me to address that? Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, there's certainly mandatory reporting requirements for hospitals. The one that comes to mind is gunshot victims. But then there's other categories when somebody is cut with a knife, where I don't believe either it's mandatory. So, you know, we'd be very willing to sit down and have those discussions. I don't think anything but good things would come of that. It would give us the opportunity, if the public thinks that's the way to go, and I tend to think from my viewpoint that it is, services that are available, protecting people. It doesn't always have to lead to an arrest, but it should always start with the victim and the family, and what can we do for that individual family. So I think that's the framework of a great, you know, discussion for the next time, and would be 100% behind it. And on the earlier comment, you know, accountability, trust, I agree with everything I heard there. It is so important, and we're not always where we want to be. And I hope that you're wrong on that last statement about it's at an all-time low. It certainly has been a tough year. Maybe we're off the floor there. Maybe you're right, but I hope that you know, we have built some of that trust back. The difficulty is you lose it so quick. And it is something that we have to work every single day on across this department. And that's the message that I say to the cops. You know, how do you want to be remembered on your worst day? Or maybe you get called, one person calls 911 once in their life, maybe. You got to be, how do you want to be remembered for that encounter? And that's how we kind of approach it. But I don't disagree with anything that you just said. It is so critical. And accountability is behind a lot of it. People don't perceive that we hold people accountable. It's funny to me that the unions are so mad because they'll say we hold cops too accountable. So the answer is probably in the middle, but there's no doubt that that's behind so much of what we're seeing right now. And we got to work harder on it.
Well, I'm definitely going to be holding you to that, Commissioner, coming back with that very powerful question, and really another sit down with us so that we can get some of those answers. Thank you so much.
I would love to.
Well, we have reached the end of our time, and I know that many of our participants have other commitments now, and I wanted to turn this over to Minister Only Love for the next steps, and then we'll hop off after prayer.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and we want to thank the Commissioner and Chief Maddrey and Chief Holmes and Parker. We want to thank each and every one of you women faith leaders who took this time as we're going into Holy Week and Easter, and just your busy schedules for those who don't observe those holidays. We want to thank everyone for taking time for this important dialogue. In Daughters for Justice, we Reverend Chloe shared a little bit about what we have been doing. You know, we had a meeting at One Police Plaza with Chief Maddrey after our first town hall. We've been on the bi-weekly clergy and community NYPD community affairs calls. We've been signing on to campaigns such as the Right to Remain Silent and various other campaigns that are both local and national. So we have been doing a lot of work, making the connection with groups like WARM, which are very critical. We want to acknowledge our intern, Danielle Williams, who's a veteran faith organizer, who has done cure violence work herself and has graduated from Union Seminary. But we want to talk about just the next steps. So please, if you want to get involved in one of our committees, email info@Daughters4Justice.com. Our committees are anti-racism concerning policing, community neighborhood engagement, police accountability, domestic violence. These 4 pillars are the Daughters for Justice areas. And as all of these issues relate to policing, if you want to be on a committee or start a committee, please email us. Also, this is live on Facebook. We'll get it up on the Daughters for Justice YouTube. So please share this with someone who couldn't be on. You can share with men faith leaders as well. Follow us on Instagram, on Twitter. And we thank Commissioner and Chief Maddrey and Parker for being, you know, the men that are on in the women's meeting. And congratulations again to Chief Holmes. She's very humble, but she was honored this morning for Women's History Month by Monroe College, I believe. And we just truly appreciate her. And we have to lift up women that are stepping into these roles. It's hard being a woman clergy person or faith leader, but I'm sure it's hard being a woman leader as a law enforcement. So keep her in prayer as well, but we honor you. Happy Women's Month, and we're proud of you. So our founders are the Reverend Chloe Breyer from the Interfaith Center of New York, Reverend Kaji Dosa from Park Avenue Christian Church, Dr. Deborah Jenkins from Faith at Work Christian Church, Apostle Staci Ramos, Garden of Gethsemane Ministries, and myself, Minister Only Love. But it's not just us alone. We need you. And so we're going to really ask everyone, if you want to get involved, when we send out the follow-up email to this meeting, we will have a membership application. You can join as a house of faith, and you can also join as an individual member. This is a movement of women clergy dedicated to radically changing policing in this city through cooperation, through having these types of dialogues and taking other actions. And many of us have been boots on the field in the communities as faith leaders and organizers for, many years in New York City. So I thank you all for being on, and I am going to turn it back to Reverend Kaji so that our guests can give their final remarks. And thank you all from the NYPD for staying on a little bit later so we could finish this.
Really grateful. Commissioner, just wanted to give you one last chance to wrap up before we pray.
Well, I just want to thank all the Daughters for Justice for inviting us on today and continued collaboration and listening to us. And I think that we set the stage for the next one. We only got through half the agenda. So, Jeff, we'll set it up and let's continue the discussion. And I think it was a great one. And looking forward to working together moving forward. Thank you. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you, and God bless you. We will pray for you. And so now let's pull into a time of prayer. I'd invite Apostle to close us out.
Absolutely. What an amazing forum, amazing town hall. We appreciate you all so very much. And we thank you for this day. You didn't find it robbery to be here to answer questions and to share with us. So if you just hear my heart on this one and pray along with me. Gracious and most awesome, great God, we thank you on today for the balance of the meeting in which we prayed for in the beginning as we came before you. We thank you for the leadership here. We thank you and we ask you to keep the commissioner, the leadership in your fold as they go forth and deal with these very challenging situations that you will not allow any of us not to address. But we thank you for their commitment and we thank you for their willingness to help us to resolve such major issues that it is time for it to stop. We give you all the honor, all the glory, and all the praise. In your word, it says that you have come to set the captives free. Well, today we are here looking, seeking for that freedom, and we are determined to have peace in our city. We thank you for this meeting. We thank you for everyone here, especially our community. And in the dear words of our dear Chief Holmes, it is customer service at hand. That's what we're going with. So we bless you on today and we thank you. And we pray all these things in your mighty name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you all. We are signing off. This will be
Amen.
available. Share it with your friends, and we love you and we're praying with and for you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.